Germans remember a joyous moment which many thought might never happen. The removal of a physical barrier that divided a city, a country, a continent. In the end, it was a wave of people power which swept over the Berlin Wall. And yet, it was the people in power who let that wave topple it. Within weeks, that same government was toppled. Within months, the two Germanys would become one. Angela Merkel was one of the many East Germans who walked into West Berlin on that night in 1989. For her now as Chancellor, the 9th of November is a time for remembrance.
Too many people became a victim of the dictatorship. We will not forget them. I remember the people who were killed here at this wall because they were looking for freedom. I also remember the 75,000 people who were imprisoned because they tried to flee their country.
The sudden fall of the wall transformed the city almost overnight, and for some Berliners it was hard to process.
It took me a long time to integrate East Berlin into the wider city. The feeling was that it was a completely different world, and it took me about 10 years to erase the border in my head.
For those growing up in the newly liberated East, life was suddenly very different. Gone were the certainties of centralized communist planning, replaced by rapid privatization and rising unemployment. Some analysts say this rush to capitalism had clear consequences.
The starting position of East Germany after unification was very bad because of the one-to-one East German, West German mark conversion, which essentially meant an immediate appreciation of the East German currency and rendered most East German firms completely, if not obsolete, at least completely non-competitive.
The industries that now flourish in the East bear little resemblance to their communist predecessors. These days, Eastern GDP is 82% of its Western counterpart. Monthly salaries in the East are around 20% lower than in the West. And the gap between the two is greater now than at any point in this century. Underlying this economic reality is the political one. For the last 4 years, a succession of states in the old East have seen a stark rise in support for the far right and left, fueled in some minds by the refugee crisis and a lingering sense that reunification has not brought what was promised. 30 years ago, East Germans began the process of abandoning communism here. 30 years on, there are many who've begun to wonder if democracy is any better. Dominic, Kane, Jazeera, Berlin.